Hey everybody, it's Robert F. Kennedy Jr. here, and I cannot tell you how happy I am to be able to have this opportunity to talk to thousands of citizens in 15 countries on all the continents in the world who have come together today to protest this coup d'etat by big data, by big telecom, by big tech, by the big oil and chemical companies, and by this global public health cartel led by Bill Gates and the WHO that now amounts to $2 trillion and wants to magnify and amplify its wealth and its power over our lives, over our liberties, that wants to subvert our democracies, that want to destroy our sovereignty and our control over our lives and our children's health. And I want to remind you, those of you who are not Americans, of something that every American child learns when we're growing up in this country about our history. And during the Great Depression, Franklin Roosevelt, who was one of the greatest presidents of American history, said to the American people, the only thing that we have to fear is fear itself. And we grow up hearing that, but people don't really understand what it means. But it was a very, very profound warning by Roosevelt, because he saw what the Great Depression was doing in Eastern Europe, in Italy, in Germany, in Spain, where that crisis was turning people towards fascism. In the Eastern countries, where the same crisis was turning citizens and governments towards communism, and also causing the collapse of governments all over the world. And in our country, in the United States, it's hard for people to remember today that almost a third of the people in our country were completely disillusioned with capitalism and wanted to turn to communism, and another third wanted to turn to fascism. And Franklin Roosevelt wanted to preserve our country for democracy, for free market capitalism, for civil rights, and to preserve our Constitution. And he recognized that the weapon of authoritarian control was going to be fear. And when I spoke a few weeks ago in Berlin, I reminded the people of Germany of a very famous story that happened during the Nuremberg trials after World War II, when Hitler's closest lieutenant, the head of the Luftwaffe, Hermann Goering, was asked by one of the prosecutors, how did you get the German people? The German people were the most educated people in the world. They were some of the most tolerant people in the world. The Weimar Republic was one of the strongest democracies in the world. How did you take these people who were so well educated and so awakened and so tolerant and turn them into obedient slaves who committed some of the worst atrocities in human history? And Goering said, oh, that's a simple thing. And any of you can look up his quote, and I urge you to do so. And he said, and it works not just in a fascist government, but it works in a democracy, in a monarchy, in a communist government, in any government that you want. The job of the government is to put the people in fear. And if you can keep them in fear, you can get them to do anything that you want them to do, that they will turn into sheep. And there's a famous book by Naomi Klein that all of us should read called Disaster Capitalism. And that book shows, it's a historical chronology of all of the times during American history and the history of the world during the Great Depression, and during the financial collapse in 2008, and during the financial collapse in Chile, for example, in 1973, during the time of the World Trade Center bombing, that authoritarian elements in a society and large corporations and wealthy plutocrats and oligarchs, wealthy families and individuals use crises to shift wealth upward, to obliterate the middle classes of those countries, and to clamp down totalitarian controls. And of course, it's an obvious thing that people who are used to voting for their governments are not going to vote for policies that make the rich people richer, that give corporations even more power over their lives, that reduce democracy and reduce civil rights. These are not good vessels for populism. In order to transform the government so that it will reward the rich with even more wealth, the people who want to do that in the large corporations, who want to orchestrate that kind of change, have to get rid of the civil rights. And the first civil right that they begin with is freedom of speech. They need to clamp down censorship, because censorship is the most important right. In our country, we put it number one, the First Amendment of the Constitution, because all the other rights depend on it. If a government can hide what it's doing, it can get away with anything it wants. If a corporation can lie to you and conceal information, if there's no transparency in a democracy, you do not have a democracy. So if you want to get rid of all the other rights, like freedom of assembly, which you are exercising today, some of you are exercising at great threats. Some of you will suffer. Some of you will be jailed. Some of you will suffer injuries. But that is a basic right. The right to freedom of expression, the right to jury trial, the right to freedom of religion, the right to privacy, the right to have governments that don't spy on you and keep your information. All of those other rights can only be subverted if they begin by imposing censorship, by being able to silence people who want to speak. So the coup d'etat that we are all fighting today is a coup d'etat that starts with a conspiracy between the government agencies and the big technology companies, the Silicon Valley billionaires, people like Zuckerberg and Bill Gates, and the people who run Google and Facebook and Pinterest and all of these other Silicon Valley corporations who are now in this conspiracy to make sure that we cannot talk about our grievances. We cannot say bad things about pharmaceutical products. We cannot question government policies that make no sense to us. And I'm going to say a few things about some of those government policies. Number one, I am not a conspiracy theorist. I follow the facts. I don't know that the COVID illness was laboratory generated in Wuhan. There is plenty of evidence that it was, but not enough evidence for me to say that it's a fact. My question is, why don't we know the answer to that? Why is Tony Fauci not being asked that question? Why is President Trump not launching an investigation? Or President Xi or the presidents of any of these countries saying, where did this come from? Because we need to know that. The global citizens, this is the worst calamity in history. And nobody seems curious about where this actually comes from. We know it didn't come from a bat in the wet market in Wuhan. And that story was a fable that it now has no basis, in fact. And we have Nobel laureates, and we have large institutions and investigative agencies and prosecutorial agencies are saying, we think it came from the Wuhan lab, and we think that it may have come from studies that were funded by Bill Gates and Tony Fauci. I don't know if this is true. But why are our government officials not asking that as the number one question? Why, instead of sending their police to suppress dissent, are they not sending the police to question people who may know the answer to that question? There are many other questions that I'd like to know the answer. Questions about masks. I'm very willing to accept if the masks work, and I want to wear them. If they're going to protect other people from transmissibility, then I want to wear them. But the studies that I've seen indicate that they do not work against viral transmission for the most part. There's some that say they may work under limited circumstances. What I don't want to be told is they work and you're going to wear them and you better not ask questions about it. Most Americans and most of the people on this planet, we want leadership, but we don't want bullying. And we know the difference between bullying and leadership. We want to know the truth about hydroxychloroquine. We want to know why are we spending $18 billion on vaccines and only $1.4 billion on therapeutic drugs. What is the sense of that? There are many, many other questions that we in a democracy have a right to have answered without being called conspiracy theorists, without being vilified as being inconsiderate or being bad citizens. Everybody who's part of these demonstrations are people who are striving with their lives to become good citizens. Now, let me tell you what we need to do to win this battle. The only way we can win it is with democracy. We need to fight to get our democracy back, to reclaim our democracy from these villains who are stealing it from us. And you notice the people who are getting richest from this quarantine are the same people who are censoring criticism of the quarantine. Who is becoming the richest? Jeffrey Bezos. $83 billion he's made. And he owns Amazon, and he is censoring books that criticize the quarantine. Zuckerberg, who owns Facebook, who's made tens of billions of dollars by this quarantine. And he is censoring information that is critical of the quarantine. He censors my Instagram. He censors my Facebook. My Twitter page is also censored. And all of these people are the people who are making billions of dollars on the quarantine. And what I want to know is a simple question. Is the quarantine actually effective? You know, we've had plenty of pandemics in the past. In 1969, we had a Hong Kong flu pandemic that killed 100,000 people in the United States. It's the equivalent of 200,000 people today. That's the same number of people who are being killed by coronavirus. Did we go into lockdown? No. Did we wear masks? No. We went to Woodstock. We went to the Democratic Convention in Chicago and had huge crowds of people. Nobody was told to lock down and don't see your girlfriend and wear a mask and don't go out of your house and shut down your business and bankrupt every business in the country. Last year, there were 1.6 million people in the world who died from tuberculosis. We have 1.6 million people die every year from tuberculosis. We're not wearing masks. We're not on lockdown. What's the difference between tuberculosis and coronavirus? Tuberculosis has a vaccine, and the vaccine costs about $3. And that's why we're not on lockdown, because nobody is making $39 a vaccine or $300 a vaccine the way that Moderna and AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson are making from this catastrophe. And that is the only reason that I can think of. And I'm happy if somebody tells me there's another reason. But let's hear it. Don't just shut me up. Don't just tell me that I can't debate. Here's what we need to do. We need to do exactly what you're doing today. We need to come out on the street and we need to stick together. What the big tech villains and scoundrels and Mark Zuckerberg and Jeffrey Bezos and Bill Gates and Tony Fauci want you to do is they want us fighting with each other. They want blacks fighting against whites. They want Republicans fighting against Democrats. They want everybody polarized. They want everybody fragmented. because they know that if we all get together, we're going to start asking questions. And those are questions that they can't answer. Why are you getting rich, and why are we all getting poor? And what's the difference between tuberculosis and coronavirus? And why are we not wearing masks for the tuberculosis, but we are for the coronavirus? And where did it all come from? And all of those questions that we deserve an answer to, and we're not getting answered. We need to stick together. If you're a Republican or Democrat, stop talking about that. Stop identifying yourself. The enemy is big tech, big data, big oil, big pharma, the medical cartel, the government totalitarian elements that are trying to oppress us, that are trying to rob us of our liberties, of our democracy, of our freedom of thought, of our freedom of expression, of our freedom of assembly, and all of the freedoms that give dignity to humanity. And the last thing that all of us need to do is we need to stay educated and informed. And one of the things that I want to announce to you today is that Children's Health Defense, my organization, with the help of many of you who are in these crowds, is launching a journal, a daily journal, and we are going to weaponize information for you. We're going to tell you what the newest science is. We're going to take all the information that is censored everywhere else, and we're going to reprint it in our publication. And you can get that every day. So if you see something that is censored, we want to hear about it because we want to put it up. We are going to be the enemies of censorship. We are going to be the refuge. And we're going to allow debate. We're going to make sure it's civil debate. We're going to encourage people to be nonpartisan. We're going to allow people to come and have different opinions than us. We are not scared of debate the way pharmaceutical company and Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg and Jeffrey Bezos and Tony Fauci are terrified of debate. We welcome debate. We want to hear, if you've got a different opinion than me, I want to hear about it, and I want to see your science. And I want the public to hear us talking about it and debating about it, because the free flow of information, the cauldron of debate, is the only thing that allows governments to develop rational policies in which self-governance will actually work and triumph. You are on the front lines of the most important battle in history, and it is the battle to save democracy and freedom and human liberty and human dignity from this totalitarian cartel that is trying to rob us simultaneously in every nation in the world of the rights that every human being is born with. So thank you for your courage, thank you for your commitment, and thank you for your brotherhood. And I can pledge to you that I will go down dying with my boots on, fighting side by side with all of you to make sure that we return these rights and preserve them for our children. And I will see all of you on the barricades. Thank you.